So first of all, I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. I'm going to move on to the next slide, show you. My name is Danielle Agonu. I'm the Executive Head Teacher at the Galaxy Trust. We are a trust of primary schools, and I work across the schools within our trust, but only one of our schools is an early adopter school because of the kind of the makeup of our settings. And I'm going to introduce Dina, who's going to talk about herself a little bit.
Hello everybody, so my name's Dina Lodell. As Danielle said, we have 3 schools across the Galaxy Trust. I work at one of those 3 schools, so I work at Temple Hill Primary Academy, and we are a very large full-form entry school in Dartford. I am an assistant head for early years at Temple Hill and also an SLE for EYFS.
We're looking forward to talking through our experiences this year, and as Laura said, please put questions in the chat. We're happy to answer them afterwards.
So just a kind of track back, if we say. So we probably already know that there was a consultation to the EYFS reforms. So draft proposals have already been out since 2018, and then in 2019 the DfE held a consultation where they were seeking views on the proposed changes to the framework for early years. So the 2 key aims of those proposed changes were to improve the outcomes at age 5, so particularly thinking about early language and literacy, and then to reduce workload so that us as practitioners spend more time with the children interacting rather than us spending unnecessary time and hours filling in paperwork. There were several revisions to the following, so educational programmes of study, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail, the early learning goals, assessment and moderation process for the early years foundation stage profile, and there was a proposed change to the safeguarding and welfare requirements to promote good oral health.
And just before we go on, just to give you a bit of context about the school that is the early adopter school, it is a normal, fully functioning school. It is very multicultural. We have high levels of SEN, pupil premium. So we felt it was a really good choice to choose that one out of our trust. All of our schools are very different, but it gives you a bit of context that the children within that setting are all very different, all come from very different backgrounds.
Last academic year, schools were asked to sign up to become early adopters of the new EYFS framework, which was ahead of the national rollout, which, as we all know, is September 2021. This academic year, around 2,900 schools have signed up to become early adopters. I think it might have been likely that before COVID, there were more schools who were open and kind of up for that. However, there was a kind of email that went out saying that we kind of had time to rethink it, and if we decided that it wasn't for us, that was okay. We obviously decided to stick with our journey. All early adopter schools are required to follow the early years for all of their EYFS provisions. So for us, for example, we have a nursery as well as reception classes. So our early adoption will be and is across the nursery and the reception setting. All early adopter schools are exempt from local authority moderation this academic year. So if you are an early adopter school and you are being asked for that, please just say no. All early adopter schools are still required to submit our data to our local authority in the summer term as normal, but that will look slightly different in terms of the levels that we report back, and Danielle and I will talk a little bit about that later on.
Local authorities are currently being offered training to support them with this transition, so they will be have 2 hats on at the moment around being early adopters in the new framework and the existing framework that's currently in place.
So what has changed? So there are completely new educational programmes for all areas of learning. These have been introduced, and they're made up of short paragraphs which explain the meaning of each area, and they are there to shape experiences and activities for children in all early years settings. There is a huge focus on early language and extending vocabulary throughout the programmes. You probably already know there was a new development matters which was published at the beginning of October, I believe. Feels like that was a long time ago. It was worked on by Dr. Julian Grenier alongside some other people over the last 18 months. There have been changes to the early learning goals, just a kind of brief short description of that. So they are clearer and more specific. There's a focus on early language and extending vocabulary throughout them. And then some changes have had more specific changes made to the early learning goals, that's some areas, sorry. And Danielle, did you want to talk a little bit about the protected characteristics?
Yes, there's a great emphasis within the new framework around supporting children who are disadvantaged or who have additional needs. And we'll talk more and more about it as we go through. But what I really like about the framework going forwards is that there's a real focus on what do those children need to develop and move forward further. So there is, as we'll talk about more later, exceeding has now gone from the framework and from the assessment aspect of early years, but that gives practitioners a real focus on those children who are struggling or just under the radar of being able to achieve their GLD. And I think that shift in making sure that senior leaders and practitioners in early years are aware that teaching to the gaps of those children has a significant importance is a real positive change, because that gives all leaders and people working within early years the support and the resources to really think about how they can move and create that foundation. It's called the foundation stage, but the foundation for children's future learning by focusing on real specifics that they need going forwards. And there's a real celebration for EAL children and how they're assessed and exploring their culture within the setting. And it's just really refreshing to see how this approach is being put into a guidance document and therefore being promoted across early years across the country going forward.
So a little bit about the revisions to the early learning goals. So the early learning goals continue to summarise the knowledge and skills and the understanding that all children should have gained by the end of the reception year. They are a specific endpoint assessment. They should not be used as a curriculum. So we should not be teaching to the early learning goals. We should not allow those early learning goals to drive our curriculum, because then I believe that that narrows what we're actually giving children in terms of experiences. And the best bit for me is that there's a real focus on not being required to collect or record unnecessary evidence to prove profile judgments. We as practitioners, I truly believe, and I'm sure we all do, we know our children. We are with those children every single day for most of the day, and actually our professional judgment sometimes, I don't know about everybody else, but in different settings and in different schools that I've worked in, quite often I've been made to feel like if I didn't produce, meaningless documents, kind of reams and reams of proof that a particular child was working, I believed at the early learning goal, that it wasn't necessarily always believed, whereas actually I knew, and anyone in the setting would have known by just kind of watching that child and seeing their experiences and the learning that was happening, that that was true. So it is really good in terms of the fact that now we can, if you're in a setting where you have an SLT that you may think, are asking that of you, to go back and say, actually, that isn't the point. We're not required to collect or record any unnecessary evidence. So for me, I think that's really powerful for us. In terms of more specific changes, so whereas before the first primary area of learning was PSED, that's been moved down now, and communication and language is a huge, huge focus. It's obviously interwoven throughout the entire curriculum, as it always has been, but there is more focus on extending vocabulary. PSED, self-regulation, has been included, and self-care has been moved now to PSED. I think it fits better. In terms of physical development, there's been a separation of the fine and gross motor skills. Literacy now has comprehension included. Maths is, Danielle and I have a conversation about this one. Maths is one that is controversial, shall we say. So there's a greater focus on a deep understanding of numbers to 10. So, the oneness of one. There is a new early learning goal on number patterns. Shape, space and measure has been removed, and that is a bone of contention for many people. Lots of people believe that it shouldn't have been removed. However, it does remain in the educational programme of study, so we should still be teaching that very important area of maths. In terms of UW, technology has been removed as an early learning goal. There's now more definition for different areas of learning, including science, history and geography. And in terms of EAD, there's more clarity and focus on developing through the area of learning, particularly with a focus on skills. Again, just to reiterate, the early learning goals are a specific endpoint assessment, and we shouldn't be using them as a curriculum. So we shouldn't be teaching to the early learning goals. They are important, of course, but they're not the be all and end all. I think sometimes there's often been too much focus on achieving the early learning goal rather than kind of focusing on this the steps for children in their learning. And I think having this clarity around the curriculum, and there's been a lot of guidance that's come out from the DFE, you know, where they're very clear in saying that that is not what is expected, I think might help, particularly when those of us in early years are having those kind of pupil progress conversations with our senior leaders, kind of to back us up, just to kind of say that, you know, this isn't actually what it is.
What's really great today is that I can see there's a selection of head teachers, practitioners, and kind of going forwards, it's thinking, just emphasizing what Dina was saying, that this isn't meant to be a checklist or a tick box. That's not what Development Matters is meant to be going forwards. It is about that constant argument around attainment and achievement, and what are these children going to achieve. Yes, attainment is important. We know that children have to get GLD at the end of the academic year if they're going to be on track. However, there's such cohesion around the new framework and Development Matters with the new Ofsted framework around quality of education, and with Cal being at the forefront, the skills of communication and how that leads into reading. And we all know, kind of working with in different settings, in different contexts, how vital it is that children have a grasp or a strong foundation of speaking and listening, as well as opportunities to develop their reading skills, early reading, and how that is the vehicle for them to access all the other elements of their education, whilst also developing those social skills and interaction skills. So that emphasis on Cal going forwards, and the emphasis on the quality of education that's happening, I feel is really in tune with the new Ofsted framework. That again is something else I really like, the new Ofsted framework and how this fits in together with that.
So just, oh, you've gone too far, Danielle. Can you go back one?
Yeah.
So just to talk a little bit about the foundation stage profile and moderation. So again, I am going to keep saying this today, we are not required to collect or record unnecessary evidence to prove profile judgments. I'm sure, you know, Danielle and I have worked together for a number of years, and we quite often sit and have those pupil progress meetings, and she says, so what's it going to be this year? And I say, well, it depends on what the children come in at. You know, and that is that, you know, ongoing conversation that we have. You know, children are not linear, you know, it's all about personalisation of curriculum, and actually, you know, no cohort of children is ever the same. So in terms of moderation, more specifically, the statutory duty for local authorities to moderate has been removed. Schools, as I said before, will still be required to submit their data. It will still be collected and published nationally. Early adopter schools should not be asked by any local authorities to take part in moderation this year. However, if you feel that it's beneficial to you, I am starting to reach out to some other schools that are early adopters, just to kind of get a feel of how things are going. You know, Danielle and I will talk a little bit more later on, but we have developed a kind of early adopters hub. You know, I think it's really nice to kind of get together and to kind of have that conversation in terms of moderation. But what I don't think is useful, or has been useful previously, if you've had somebody come in and it's, rather than it be more of a conversation, you sometimes feel like you're being judged. Exceeding has gone. So it's been removed. It's claimed in order to free up teachers' time, children will either be expected or they are emerging. So we're now not reporting back a 1, 2 and 3, it will be a 1 or a 2. We will still be expected to continually identify and stretch our more able children. But personally, I feel that's a really positive thing that's happened, because you quite often, if you work in Key Stage 1 or have worked in Key Stage 1 or even Key Stage 2, again, you have those pupil progress meetings, and there are conversations whereby they say, you know, well, when they were in the early years, you know, they achieved a 3, so therefore that child must be exceeding. And actually it doesn't work like that, nor should it. So I think, again, that just strengthens, you know, us feeling like actually we don't have to, you know, say if a child at age 4 or 5 is exceeding in a particular area of learning, because actually, you know, life happens, and actually whilst a child might be exceeding in an early years curriculum, that doesn't necessarily mean that it translates into the national curriculum. Sorry, Danielle, you're going to talk a little bit before about kind of the experiences in terms of exceeding.
Yes, just around, I know that maybe some people are on a bit concerned that exceeding is gone because they think about greater depth, just like Dina said about that transition. There's been a constant dialogue, I'll call it a professional dialogue, around the fact that early years is a specialist area. It's a specialist type of learning, specialist curriculum, and children move into the national curriculum. So how that transfers is very different, and transition is very, very important from early years into key stage 1. However, removing exceeding takes pressure away from schools to try and push those children. There might be some children who are naturally exceeding. Of course, there are children that come into early years and they flourish and they move and they go into being able to write reams of stories and so on and so forth. However, that doesn't always transcend into national curriculum, and there's often that difficult conversation around, well, like Dina said, they've achieved this, they should be achieving that going forward. So I go back to attainment and achieving. The attainment of the children, yes, it's normally around passing a test and being able to sit that and be able to do that. That's what we do going forward in primary school and in secondary school. But the achievement aspect of it, now that that's been taken away, it's whether the children are on track. Are they going to meet what they need to meet to achieve GLD, or are they not? And that allows practitioners and senior leaders, because it should be everybody working together, to focus on those children who are at jeopardy of not achieving those goals going forward. So then provision is tailored and supported, and it prevents the gap from disadvantaged getting bigger, which we constantly talk about. We've had pupil premium for years that has been ploughed into schools, and yet the division between disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged maintains. And with COVID, sadly, that seems to be getting bigger. So having that focus on the most vulnerable does not disregard the other children, of course not, because if you put the provision in place for the vulnerable, everybody benefits. And I think that's the benefit of not having that exceeding judgment. It means that it goes back to the quality of education, the quality of provision for all those children within that cohort, and it's cohort specific. Do you want to talk about oral health or?
Oh yeah, so there's now there's going to be a change as part of the safeguarding and welfare requirements. There's now a need to include oral health alongside the requirement to promote good health of children. However, individual settings and schools can decide how best to meet that requirement, and we are not going to be required to assess this. So Danielle and I had a conversation. I think again it's very much cohort specific. If you are in an area where you have children who have great oral health, then you maybe will not have as much of a focus on if, for example, you have a cohort of children, or you're in quite a deprived area where actually you know, children are coming in, like for example the school we work in, you know, they're coming in, their teeth are being removed before their age, you know, 5, because of, you know, lots of different things, you know, maybe they're not eating the right food. And so I'd had a conversation with my team and they said, you know, does this mean that we are going to make them brush their teeth every day? And I said, no, it doesn't necessarily mean that, but actually if we know that our children are coming in and they're not brushing their teeth, then why not? I mean, obviously this is like, you know, COVID and all of that kind of stuff before then, but again, you know, it's cohort specific. But I think my hope is that because it's been identified as being now, you know, part of the safeguarding and welfare requirements, that maybe hopefully what the government will do is they will put funding in place for different organisations to support us with the delivery of that. Do you want to do this bit, Danielle?
So what have we done so far? We are just like all the other schools across the country. We have been COVID, which is why myself and Dina had that discussion before entering this academic year to see if she still wanted to go ahead with this. And she was crazy enough to say yes. So I was like, fine, we're going full steam ahead. We have risk assessed everything under the sun like everybody else. And again, I think I just need to say to everybody, well done. We're nearly at the end of the term 1. Some of you hopefully are on half term already, but it has not been a small challenge navigating COVID in schools. So going forwards, we've created a hub. We are very outward looking as a trust. We love to interact with other schools, other trusts, and collaborate. So we created a hub because we are very much aware that not everybody's doing this early adopter focus this year. And we also wanted to just share our journey because people are going into this next year and we weren't sure how much information was going to be going out. So we're going to be doing quite a few webinars over this academic year, just to show you what we're doing. We're not saying that we're perfect. We're saying we're going to have a go at every
answers.
Feedback, yeah. And we've read, and me and Dina have lots of professional dialogue. I love early years, and obviously Dina is a specialist in early years, but I think it's just really useful to bash things out and read through things and critique them because we want the best for our children. And so sometimes the documentation doesn't come out at the correct time, or you're waiting for it to come out. We did not get anything earlier than anyone else. We were watching all of the guidance, looking at the websites and hoping things would come out before we came back, and so on and so forth. But we have lots and lots of discussions, which is what we feed into the hub that we've created.
So baseline. So we very early on decided that we were not going to do, the baseline that the government wanted us to do. I particularly felt that given we had a really huge cohort of children who had missed 6 months of their learning, and actually, you know, there were children that had never been to, or, you know, had started nursery and actually hadn't gone back. And, you know, I just felt that it wasn't appropriate for us to sit children down with compare bears and ask them to count to 20. And actually my main focus was on, you know, their personal, social and emotional development, and actually how are they going to be coming through the door. You know, I think sometimes we underestimate, you know, that, I mean, we all know that children are sponges, and I'm just thinking back to when we had our cohort of children come back in June, when there was the wider opening of schools, and the real kind of conversations that we were having, you know, because they just heard every day, you know, there was, you know, Boris was on and telling us how many people had died, and, you know, they were being told to stay away from people when they were out on the streets with their parents. And now all of a sudden we were welcoming them back, and we were like, play, you know, play with all these people, you know, and, you know, you can touch us and you can give us a hug. You know, we very much had said to parents, you know, we don't have any expectation that children in early years should be expected to socially distance. The adults will socially distance from each other where possible. But actually, I felt that those connections are what those children really, really needed. So in terms of us thinking about a baseline that we wanted to do, I stumbled across a webinar one day with Jan Dubiel, and he was talking about the importance of us having a baseline that really looks at kind of the impact of COVID this year, and actually what do we need to know about our children starting in September. So roughly around the same time, he started working with Learning Ladders, and they created the COVID ODEA assessment for baseline. And that's basically what we did. So it's time specific. So we did it within the first 3 weeks of our children starting with us. They were assessed in 5 areas. So we looked at their emotional and psychological well-being. We looked at their social development. We looked at their language development, we looked at their physical development, and we looked at their hygiene and self-care. Each of the areas had 5 separate statements, so it wasn't, you know, kind of a huge task. It also had additional supporting text, which could help the practitioners to kind of contextualise what that would look like in the environment. I felt and do feel that the areas reflected the priorities for children and their development kind of as soon as they started school. We literally made a judgment against each statement as to whether or not they were secure or they needed support. So when we had those conversations as a team, I said, you know, if you're umming and ahhing, then they need support. If you're secure about it, you know, when you think about that child, yeah, 100% I know what they're doing. And actually it was something that was quite natural and organic for us. It wasn't, you know, practitioners weren't sitting down ticking off sheets while they were with children. I said to them, just play, talk to the children, explore with the children, you know, think about that continuous provision, think about how you can, you know, step back and watch what they do, but then kind of jump in at those moments to kind of extend or consolidate learning and just kind of develop those interactions. And then based on that afterwards, our teaching assistants and teachers would get together and discuss the children and then work their way through them. The thing I liked about it was that there were signposts. So if a child was assessed as requiring additional support in an area, then it basically kind of signposted you to different resources and guidance materials that were available for each of the assessment areas, and you could use those. And then the idea around it in terms of data analysis would be that it would support the teachers to kind of identify critical areas, aspects of children's learning and development that might have been adversely affected by the kind of lockdown and the children's experiences. I will say that it didn't tell me anything that it didn't tell us anything that I think we didn't already know. So I think it was good for us, you know, for our particular cohort of children. Language development came up, as well as PSED, in terms of, you know, lots of our children had not shared for a very long time. You know, they were at home and they kind of, you know, their parents were loving on them as much as they wanted and as they should have been at that time, of course. And again, you know, Danielle and I laugh all the time just about independence. I tell this kind of story, and I've never come across it before, but there was a little boy, and we had banana, and he just bit the banana because he didn't know that you had to peel a banana, and that's how you open it, and then you bite it. And then we have those children, you know, who stand like a tree, and they think that the coat is going to magically go on, and you say, no, you know, you need to help it. It doesn't just jump on, you know, mummy's or daddy's not, or your grown-up's not here to help you. You need to try. You know, or the child that puts their wellies on to go and jump outside, and they're kind of, this is the foot, and they're kind of doing this, but the eyes aren't looking at it. So we had a really, really big focus just literally on children and independence, and that's what we got from that. So I found it really useful. I'd be interested in if anybody else did that, to see how they felt about it. And again, it just confirmed for us at Temple Hill, we have a tricky cohort of children in that we're in one of the kind of more deprived areas of Kent. If you did a random, sorry, I've got a small child talking to me, the joys of working at home. If you did a quick Google, you don't really find very many nice things, do you, Danielle, that come up about Temple Hill, unfortunately. But, you know, it's an incredible place to work, and I absolutely love it. But it does mean that our children do come with some additional challenges and additional needs. So, for example, this year, so on entry, on the first 3 weeks of entry for all of our reception children, we do something called a language link assessment. And what it basically does is it checks a children's understanding of language. You quite often get children who you think actually have a really good understanding because they can kind of talk the talk, but actually when you really pick it apart and you ask questions, they're the children where you kind of ask a question about a story and they tell you what they had for dinner last night. So what it does is it really enables us to identify who might have a severe delay in understanding of language, who has a moderate delay, and who is sort of on track. And this year, we normally have about 40%, which is obviously quite high, but this year I think we've got 52% of our children who have come to us after the COVID lockdown with either a moderate or a severe delay of their understanding of language. So yeah, that's what we've been doing. Danielle, do you want to talk a bit about Development Matters?
So we waited and we waited and we waited for Development Matters to come out, and we panicked a little bit, but then it eventually came out just in time, which was really good.
Christmas. It was all on Twitter. Yeah. One of my fellow teacher friends was like, it's here, and yeah.
We were going into a bit of a panic and trying to think about a plan B, but thankfully the government showed up and sent it out just in time for us. Again, talking about the area, Temple Hill, it's one of the most deprived areas in the country, and definitely one of the most deprived areas in Kent. It's a fantastic area to work in. We absolutely love it, but it does have its challenges. And how the Development Matters has presented itself, it really just suits us and fits our cohort. It looks different. It doesn't have all the lovely pictures, and I'm sure all of you are well versed in what Development Matters currently looks like for everybody else, the different way it's set out and the different months and how it presents itself. But the idea around the guidance that's been released, or the Development Matters guidance that's been released now, is not for it to be a tick sheet. It's not for it to be pretty and used in that way. What it's meant to be is a guide, and the areas are quite broad, which is what I think has created a bit of a stir in the early years world, because it's not specifically broken down into really specific areas. It goes back to quality of education and back to the practitioners in the setting, really knowing those children and having that depth of learning and being able to revisit and really, really tailor. We're quite forensic with our data, how we use data within our trust. So really tailoring provision to support the children and what they need. And I'm very much aware that in different early years settings, when it came out, it caused quite a big stir because of how it looked and what it involved.
We just did a little bit of a breakdown here. So the key objectives of the new Development Matters is all about, obviously, improving early years outcomes. It's the belief that having a rich curriculum and strong practice in teaching will be what drives best outcomes for our children. So there is, as I said, a move away from kind of the lengthy tracking processes that actually take us away from spending quality time interacting with children. I'm hopeful that it will bring a reduction in our workload, and rather than us kind of focusing on gathering evidence in terms of observations or whatever else you might do in your setting, but actually we can spend time on recording children's progress. The focus should be on kind of alleviating the pressure of everybody in the setting. And actually our focus then should be on, in terms of planning, you know, thinking about the curriculum, the content and the progression of skills for children. Also the key objectives are that it does provide an opportunity to develop kind of specific guidance for reception that does sit alongside the early years, but also has some links to the national curriculum to help support the transition for early years to Key Stage 1. I know obviously that for many of us has been a bone of contention for many years. Should early years be like year 1 or should year 1 be more like early years? I'm not going to get into that debate today. What we've noticed, so again, there's a huge focus on communication, which really fits well with our particular cohort of children. There's that focus on the early identification of SEN. So it talks a lot about having those early collaborations with medical professionals, thinking about the children that are at risk of falling behind. So they've got some observation checkpoints included, which again are not a tick list, but it will give you an idea as to around a typical child's development at a particular age and stage. I think it's very useful in terms of having those conversations quite early on with parents if you've got children that you think there potentially might be an SEND need. We are very lucky at Temple Hill, so because we're a big school, we have got a SENCO for early years, so her focus and a big focus for us is on early identification of SEN. As you know, Danielle talked about before, you know, the gaps between children just continue to grow, particularly with disadvantaged. And what we're finding is that there are some children who, you know, when they get to year 2 or 3 or 4, actually, you know, we've missed, you know, some huge, you know, difficulties that they have. And actually, if we spend our time interacting with the children and really, really thinking about, you know, where are they, you know, are they falling behind, you know, forget about the, I don't want people to think that I don't care about exceeding, because that's not true, because I think that actually, if you link it back to the characteristics of effective learning, you think about your continuous provision and how that actually, you know, can provide that depth of curriculum for the children and kind of can provide them those opportunities to extend and consolidate their learning, then I do think that children should be stretched. I think particularly with our cohort, what we find is that we often have, I think this year we're running at about 27% of our cohort of children have got SEND needs, and some of those are quite profound, and some of those are obviously not necessarily missed, or some children haven't been to nursery, so they haven't started that process. So we start obviously in early years at the very beginning with paediatrician referrals and things. So I think the fact that there is a focus on early identification of SEN is really positive. I absolutely love about the emphasis on having highly skilled practitioners. You know, Danielle and I have this conversation about, you know, I think that potentially some of your most experienced and therefore your most expensive practitioners should be put in the early years. It's the early years for a reason. I think it's the most important part of the school. That's just me. It talks about pathways of children's development in kind of broad stages, but again, there is an emphasis on the fact that, you know, learning isn't linear. You know, children aren't little robots and they don't all follow and do the things that we want them to do. And you know, again, it's about that personalization of learning and developing a curriculum that fits your cohort and the needs of your children. It talks a lot about accurate assessment. I'm sure if you're somebody who's in SLT and has pupil progress, that's the constant conversation about, you know, the accuracy of assessment and how do we know that it's accurate, thinking about kind of mastery of learning through depth. And as I said, you know, for us, we're really looking and pulling apart our continuous provision. You know, what does it look like? I know when I first started in early years, I used to say that, you know, I thought that continuous provision was just pulling everything out and just putting it out. And, you know, obviously as you know, you're more experienced, you realise that it's not about that at all. So we've got a really big focus on the moment in our setting about depth of learning through continuous provision. And then I can't see that little bit. We've got, yeah, you know, promotion of independence and resilience, as well as, you know, us really thinking about what do our children bring into the setting and what do they know and how can we then use their knowledge and their skills, even, you know, at the age of 4 or 5 or even 3 in our nursery, to kind of build on what they know.
We're really fortunate that 3 schools across our trust are very different, and the early years leads are all fantastic and they work really, really closely together, which is a real strength to our trust, particularly and our early years settings across the schools that we have. And what we've noticed, and I'm sure this is a national trend, is that SEN has increased significantly across all of our early years. So one of our schools is in a more affluent area Dartford. One of our schools is in between the Temple Hill area and the West Hill area. So we've got a real mixture, like I said before, about our demographic and economic demographic across our trust. But we've seen this trend. So having that early identification and it being all over Development Matters, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably nodding your heads as well around just the shift in what's presenting when children are coming into their first experience of school, or in nurseries if you have nurseries as well. So these are our thoughts. There were lots and lots of things out all over the internet universe around the new framework, around Development Matters. This is what the critics have said. We have seen some people start to make tick sheets in line with the new framework. I'm not criticizing.
Have them.
It's fine if they want to do it that way, but again, I'm going to emphasize that this isn't a tick box. Remember when you had to click them all off and everything? It's not a tick box approach. It is about getting to know the children, understanding their needs, and finding what best suits them and providing that provision for them. I'll let you read through that, but I think what's happened in the early years world is that there were two schools, or that's what they believed, around there being child-led and then adult supported, and that there needs to be this big divide. I don't feel there needs to be this big divide. I feel that actually both approaches are valid and suitable for different contexts. It's not a one box fits all, and that's what this framework and that's what Development Matters demonstrates. It's not a one box fits all. It's what works for your children in your cohort, but that adults who are highly trained to teach to gaps is beneficial. That doesn't mean children can't have free exploration as part of their day and lead the curriculum focus, as in they might like bugs, so you're going to do a whole project on bugs for those children. Of course you will. However, the adults need to be highly skilled to support some of those vulnerable children, those disadvantaged children, those SEN children, in order to help them achieve their best potential.
I'm just going to jump in there, Danielle, just to say, you know, for our children in particular in Temple Hill, a lot of our families, a lot of our parents and carers didn't finish school. So some of them didn't finish secondary school, some of them didn't go to secondary school. Our parents are always very open and honest with us, and some of them will say to us, you know, please can you tell me what's in that letter, because actually I can't read. And for us, and I'm not going to say it's for all of our children because that's obviously not true, but for a large majority of our children, if we don't teach them to be literate or numerate from very early on, we know that those children are not going to be able to have that support from home. And what then happens is that gap, again, just begins to widen. As Danielle was saying, you know, maybe one of our more affluent schools, you know, majority of those children will always be literate or numerate because of their parents and the value that they place on you know, kind of literacy and numeracy, but a big focus for those children potentially might be on PSED. You know, lots of those children, particularly in more affluent areas, you know, I've been to grammar schools, and, you know, there's like a huge, you know, there's a lot of emotional and social development that, you know, there needs to be a really big focus in terms of children and high expectations. So that would be different for those children. And then obviously you've got one of our other schools where it's sort of in the middle. One of our schools has a completely child-led approach. It works for those cohort of children, or for that cohort of children, I should say. One of the other schools in our trust, I'd say, is sort of like a mixture. We at Temple Hill, we do have focus activities. So we do have a maths session every day, maximum of 15-20 minutes. We do also have a literacy session every day. We're a Power of Reading school, so we immerse the children in language and literature and developing vocabulary in kind of really rich texts. The children will have a focus activity. They will spend 20 minutes once a week with an adult where we kind of teach them a particular skill that's linked to the learning that's taken place that week, and it's sort of, you know, out in the environment, and we encourage the children to build on those skills. I laugh when I say it, but they don't spontaneously combust. If I get them to sit down with me for 20 minutes and we talk about, you know, if they want to write a letter, you know, just as you would if it was in child initiated learning, you know, even in child-led learning, there is that kind of spontaneous curriculum progression. You know, as practitioners, we say, this is what we think that child at this point in time needs to know or needs to learn in order to move them on. So, you know, it's, you know, horses for courses. But I mean, for us, it works. you know, as our cohort changes, maybe, you know, it will change the way we do things, you know, and that's why I think one of the reasons why I really wanted to be part of the early adopter scheme kind of this year is because I really feel like this is the only year that we're going to get that opportunity to not necessarily do what we want, but to be brave. You know, sort of, we're not, you know, nobody's going to come and ask me questions about, you know, what was your last 3-year trend in early years? You know, we're not thinking about, you know, comparisons between last year's cohort of children and this year's cohort of children in terms of, you know, good levels of development. And, you know, I've said to my team, you know, actually, let's not run before we can walk. Let's really spend our time pulling apart this curriculum, what it means for our children in particular. And actually, if something doesn't work, that's okay. You know, like, let's trust our judgment. We know our cohort of children. We don't think we know everything by far. But for me, this year is kind of all about us kind of developing an understanding of what that new framework is going to look like. It's coming, whether we like it or not. You know, I'm someone who doesn't always like change. You know, we haven't had a new curriculum since 2012. So in some way, shape or form, I do think it's, you know, it's been something that's been a long time coming. But I guess for us, as we move through this year, and, you know, Danielle and I, the idea is that we'd kind of have just more kind of sessions with people, and as the year goes on, just kind of to make links, for us really to kind of just think about what works for our children. And for me, you know, I don't have this year, I don't have the worry of, you know, percentage or, you know, we're very lucky we're not having Ofsted. We had Ofsted in 2019. So I think it's a really exciting time to be an early adopter school. You know, be brave, be a maverick. You know, we often are. We're the ones that do the things and not everybody does. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, you know, but I think, you know, we all, no matter, you know, what school we're in, we all have the best interests of our children at heart. And yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be an early adopter.
Okay, so please talk to us. We are happy for people to join our hub, and we're going to be documenting our journey. It's going to be an interesting journey. We're going to be brave. We're going to try things, as Dina said, and we just want to share that experience so that hopefully going forwards, people can learn from some of the things that we've done, maybe learn from our mistakes, learn from our successes, but also dare to be brave going into actually something that respects the profession a bit more, around actually trusting teacher judgment and practitioner judgment. And sometimes in our profession, we're not seen to be trusted to know what we're doing, when actually there are very, very highly skilled, dedicated people across the country, across all of our schools, who really have the children at the forefront of their practice.
I think what this really gives us, maybe in some way for the first time, I say ever, it sounds a bit dramatic, but I feel like having these educational programs of study, it really gives us the opportunity to have the autonomy over our curriculum. You know, it gives us the ideas and experiences of what our children should know, but how we do that, you know, is completely up to us. And, you know, what, you know, my team might think works best for our children, you know, in a, you know, city of Dartford, where it's really deprived, versus, you know, maybe one of my friends that works in a school in Brent, or one of my friends that might work, you know, in Hackney opposite Victoria Park, where, you know, the houses are multi-millions of pounds. Actually, it gives us a real opportunity to develop something that's really, really special and is really personal to our children in our schools.
That's us done.
Thank you so much, Daniela and Dina. Really interesting to hear about the updates and also to hear about your journey so far. We do have a few questions and we've got just over 10 minutes. So hopefully we'll be able to cover some of those things that have come out from those people listening. We had a couple of questions about how you track for pupil progress without using the age, stage, month bands.
So we had our first pupil progress, and what we literally did, so we had a discussion about the children and we focused on those children who were not on track. So we thought about we weren't even looking at the early learning goals at this point. We did look at development matters as a guide, and we just looked at those age bandings and we thought to ourselves, at this point, at this moment in time, who in our cohort that we know do we think is not going to be on track? And those are the children that we focused on. And what we found during our pupil progress is that we did have more kind of identification of those children we thought potentially might be SEN. we, you know, had the usual, actually those children might have scored really low on the language lab, but actually those children have got English as an additional language. So for me, it's being a bit more forensic. So actually, what are we doing for that cohort of children? If we know that we've got a number of children that, you know, are struggling in terms of vocabulary and learning English, what are we doing in our teaching, and what are we putting in our environment to support that? In terms of our PSED, we've been trying to complete a body of work around that, be it, you know, some of our focus activities that we've had have been literally playing a game, you know, sitting with those children and learning to turn take. And actually, one of them that we had was about learning, hang on, sorry, yes, I will. I've bribed my children to not be here, and one's holding a sign. I will do it for you when I'm finished, darling, okay? In 10 minutes. I'm really sorry. This is the joy of working from home. So yeah, for us, that's what it's looked like. And actually, we're not 100% sure what our tracking is going to look like going forward. I've had a discussion with our head teacher, and we've agreed that we're not inputting any data for the first term, and we will track some data at Christmas, but what that actually looks like at the moment, I'm not actually sure. So I guess, you know, we're in that kind of position where at first I thought, oh, okay, you know, am I going to kind of have the 3 age bandings, and am I going to have, you know, developing within that age band, or am I going to have, you know, that they're secure or they're emerging in that age band? Then we had a conversation about, you know, well, they've either got it or they haven't. So for us, I think it probably will be about us thinking about a particular age band, and actually, is that child on track or are they not? And if they're not on track, what are we doing to make sure that we're providing those experiences for children to achieve? I do apologise about my son.
Too busy listening and nodding and forgot to unmute. We also have another question about maths, and you talked a little bit about how shape, space and measure have been removed from the early learning goal, and someone asked whether you follow a specific math scheme, and if so, how does that fit with the removal of that part of the early learning goal?
So we use White Rose Maths across the school. What we decided this term in particular was we spent the first, what week are we in? 10, 7, 5, whatever week we are in the term, we decided that we were going to focus on numbers to 10. So we do that through, we have 10 Town, which I'm sure if you know it, it's like, dun, 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 sing that song, 10 Town, 10 Town. Sorry, it's in my head now. So we do it through 10 Town. We focused on kind of early recognition of number. We focused on kind of chanting, thinking about, you know, kind of how they write the number. And then next term, we're focusing on numbers 1 to 10, but it's about how we can start thinking about kind of one more, we can start thinking about one less, we can start thinking about those real early experiences for children, and how we can then kind of focus on those lower numbers. So thinking about, you know, the oneness of 1, but also giving children the opportunity to apply that in real life contexts.
And I think, Dina, it goes back to something you were saying earlier about that kind of personalisation. It's actually looking at what the children need and not using the guidance as a kind of tick sheet. It's actually sort of looking at each cohort, isn't it, and being specific to their needs. The other question we had was a bit about the good level of development. So someone asked whether the expected judgment for GLD will still be a broader spectrum. Have you had any input about that?
I think, and sorry, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong. So from what I understand, it's still going to follow the same format. So I think, and I mean, I might be wrong, but from my understanding is it will still be the prime and specific areas of learning, and for the children to reach a good level of development, they will need to be on track in each of those. Again, it's just, as far as I'm aware, the only thing that has changed in terms of the foundation stage profile is the fact that there's no moderation and the exceeding has been removed.
I'm in the same camp. They haven't said anything specifically around changing the specifics and prime areas, and that they would be the GLD areas, but watch this space. But we haven't had any different information that would make us think otherwise.
And one final question, unrelated, but I think it's an important one to ask. Someone's asked if we're all singing in early years. Great for speech and language, obviously, because of the COVID.
I'm allowed to say this. Because I think you know what I'm going to say. We have this conversation in SLT, and they say, Dina, sing, but don't sing. So I think we all know what that means. So yeah, I think we are, you know, I mean, I can't imagine that there are very many, if any, early years settings that are socially distancing, and singing is absolutely everything we do. I've just embarrassed myself on a webinar singing 10 Town. You know, it is just literally something that we do constantly. You know, you sing to tidy up, you sing, you know, for somebody to sit down, you sing for the children to wait, you sing, you know, it's just something that we do. So we are singing. You know, we're not, you know, asking children to kind of sing right in each other's faces or anything, but we are still doing our everyday practice. You know, we do have our risk assessments, we do have the doors open, we do have all the windows open for ventilation, but yes, we are singing, and I hope you are as well.
Yeah, the consensus on the chat, Dina, is that yes.
My executive head hat. The guidance did change, and because we're coming into, I said the C word, Christmas. So I've got to start thinking about how on earth we're going to do Christmas in primary, because we're all primary, we love, supposedly we love Christmas, but the guidance is quite explicit around the fact that for the smaller children, as long as the provision and the risk assessments are in place, and it's a natural thing that it can be done. Hopefully things can adapt to, maybe we can sing Christmas carols or be inventive about how we do that. But with early years, it's fundamental, and the guidance and everything that's come out has supported that as well. It's adapted, and all of those from the music industry around kind of the Sing Up and Charanga have also done their own reports to support schools and support settings in being able to be safe, but also do something that's actually fundamentally really important for small children.
I mean, imagine trying to get any small person to not sing. Like, it's never gonna happen.
Or keep their distance, Dina.
Yeah, well.
So again, on behalf of everybody, I just want to thank you both for giving up your time and leading on this afternoon. You know, thank you for everyone for joining us. You know, it's that last week of term. I know everyone's on their knees, but you know, really helpful to hear your perspective, to hear the updates about the revised framework. Some of the key themes and points that I've taken, which is probably the same as what some of you have scribbled down, but that importance of reading and discussing that documentation, and especially with your SLT and your wider senior leadership team, just so that everybody's on the same page, everybody knows of those expectations. Importance of tailoring baseline and adapting things to cohorts of children, that personalisation came out really strongly. And that importance and benefit of collaboration. We're all here this afternoon because of that collaboration and working within our primary network. But I do hope that those that are here with us this afternoon take on your offer of some of the other webinars and videos that you're going to be producing this year. Because actually I think working together on something like this is going to make us all stronger come September 21. The recording and the slides will be available for you to download, and if you want to pass them on to any colleagues who couldn't come, they will be on our discourse discussion forum after half term. Please look out on the newsletter, the primary update, on the first Wednesday back after half term, and it will give you details of how to find those. Don't forget, if you haven't already, to book your free place on the primary conference. It's going to be on the 18th and 19th of November. It's free for member schools. And the theme of our conference is curriculum, and we've got really great input from Charlotte Hacking from CLPE, who's going to talk about communication and language with a specific emphasis on early years, so that'd be a really good one to catch. And if you'd like to find out more about hosting a webinar yourself, or if your school might be interested in that, please just drop me a line. As you know, Danielle and Dean have proved, it's you know, just an informal gathering and a chat about an area of practice within your school. I'd be happy to chat to you about what entails if you'd like to find out more. And lastly, from everybody at SSAT, please have a really restful half term. Everybody has worked extremely hard this term. The term has felt like a million years, I'm sure. Take a good rest, look after all yourselves of your school, and look forward to seeing you in term 2. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.